Good morning, everybody. Have a good night in Lan Kwai Fong last night? I hope so. Look, I backed my way into the mining business after running a counter-piracy program off the coast of Somalia, or actually on the shore of Somalia, which ended Somali piracy. And the first operation the guys did was 500 kilometers one way, a police unit that was built. And I thought, if we can do that logistically and unsupported, then maybe building a mine isn't so difficult. So I set off to start a private equity fund a few years ago, raised a bit of money. We ended up building a mine in Guinea, a bauxite mine, Alufair. We were very early investors on. We have a great copper block in the DRC. We found a lot of copper where no one had thought to look yet. And we built a geoscience business. And now that having gone well, decided to have a bigger go. And as I've spent a lot more time around China and dealing with both large private and large state-owned Chinese enterprises, what I really come to appreciate is that when China puts its shoulder to something and puts its mass behind, there's a lot of things start to happen. And so what I've come to realize as the world electrifies, and whether it's moving towards green energy, whether it's solar or wind, what does that require? An enormous amount of copper, because you can't store those electrons right on site. You have to transport them immediately. When you have every megawatt of wind power installed requires 7 tons of copper. And that's not even counting all the distribution wire to get it to where it's going to be used. Every vehicle's charging station, et cetera. As we think about electric vehicles, and China is now the world leader. Most of these very large cities are getting all electric buses, and when you see the growth in electric vehicles just in China alone, when you go from your cell phone has 22 grams of cobalt in it, and when you go to your electric vehicle, it goes to 10 kilograms. So the per capita use of these rare minerals goes stratospheric compared to where the demand curve is today. Look, you're at this conference because you believe in mining. I very much believe in mining. I'm not so worried about the 1 and 2 year price flows, the changes, because I think it's just a calm before the storm. When you see a massive world conversion to electric use, it's going to have second and third order effects. Look, I love a good internal combustion engine like any red-blooded American. I drive a 400 horsepower Dodge Challenger, but accepting that electric vehicles are coming and it's a way of the future is something to get behind. The other thing I see systemically, I guess maybe it's not the blind spot for China, but at the Mining in Davos show a few weeks ago, almost no Chinese presence, almost no investor presence or Chinese mining presence. The nature of how China is organized and politically, it's very hard for the big SOE executives to get permission to travel, to have the speed and the flexibility to be that wildcatter, to be someone who will go out early and find and prove and put into production, even at low cost, some of these resources. And so there's a real gap there to be that early stage, find and fix, prove and put into production. The SOEs would rather overpay for something that's in production versus taking the risk early on. And so for all this, when you have 39 auto companies around the world all putting huge resources into electric vehicles, and that's a 5 to 7 year process usually for new vehicle designs, let alone a completely different drive system to be rolled out. You have a tsunami of demand coming, and for that revolution to continue, it's going to come back to a few key minerals that are still coming from largely difficult places to obtain. The DRC, right, produces 66% of the world's cobalt. Not the easiest place to do business. 15% of that cobalt is coming out of the ground artisanally in what would, by any Western government's view, be a non-standard form of mining and not environmentally friendly and certainly not very friendly to the workers. So there's an enormous opportunity to improve the reliability and the quality of that yield. and we're very optimistic about it. We are well along into our fundraise process. We should close on our first $100 million in June, and we'll be going institutionally there around Asia, because the other major Asian economies that are producing huge amount of electronics and electric vehicles are also aware that their supply chain is vulnerable to the shocks and the shortages of who is closest to that source and who has control of that offtake. So we're optimistic. I know you're at a mining show because you're optimistic about this space as well, but I'll be happy to take any questions on the topic.
Fantastic. Well, that's an intro to the fund there. Do we have any questions immediately from the audience? Stick your hand up if you have a question. So, Erik, just to kick things off while people are ruminating about their questions, are there any particular, I mean, you mentioned cobalt there. Is that going to be the...
We like cobalt and copper and nickel, graphite, lithium. There's a lot of supply out there. The bottleneck seems to be in the processing, not as much in the supply. And we like vanadium as well.
How far up the supply chain are you going to be looking? Are you going to be looking at just mines, or are you going to be looking at actual processing plants?
We will focus on mines and tailings. We've got some new technology we'll roll out in the tailing space to pull more copper and cobalt out of tailings as well.
And when you talk about, you're going to be particularly focusing on Africa, because obviously Frontier Services Group.
Africa, we found a great resource in Colombia and the Philippines, and we're not limited to Africa at all. That's for sure.
And you say you're closing in on your first 100 million.
We should close on the first 100 in June.
The final fund.
500.
500 million. And how many companies would you expect to invest in?
Look, we wanted to do, with primary and co-investment, we wanted to do at least 8 to 10 projects. So to have enough dry powder to go through the search, whether it's a brownfield. Look, there's a lot of junior miners that need more capital that can become bigger mining operations. There's some greenfields we've identified we want to do, and between some of the big LPs that we have coming, they will want to do co-investment. So, like I said, 8 to 10 big projects.
You mentioned your Dodge Challenger. What does that do from 0 to 60?
Sub 4 seconds.
Sub 4 seconds. I believe there's a car out there. There's a couple of cars out there which will do under 2 seconds now on the EV, from the EV. So
that's true, but they don't recharge quite as quick as a tank of gas does.
15 minutes.
Look, I used to have that car in Abu Dhabi, and they have some fantastic highways there, and they didn't have the cameras in yet, so it was a great place to have a big motor car.
Yeah, but your Tesla, in ludicrous mode, we'll see you later. We'll leave the Dodge Challenger behind.
Point taken.
Do we have any questions? Any more questions from the audience?
All right.
Let's keep going. Because obviously, you're from Michigan, is that right?
That's right.
That's right. So,
I grew up around the automotive industry.
Yeah. How is the American automotive industry? Obviously, they've had a fairly dominant position in the world for many years, and then obviously the Japanese and the Europeans have come along, and now they're looking at China, where there's over 400 EV manufacturers looking to overtake the space.
My dad's business made lighted sun visors in the early 70s. Patented the visor in your car that tips down with the mirror with the lights, for that 1970s big beehive hairdo. But they rode the wave of automotive outsourcing of all those interiors. And when the Japanese showed up in the early 80s and built plants in the United States, non-union, very efficient plants, it was a real shock to the system, and it made them wake up and compete. I think this next wave of EV competition coming from around the world, certainly from China, will also have that effect. The American automakers have toyed around with electric vehicles, but have not been leading the charge because they haven't had that competitive drive to do so. Tesla has certainly come out of left field and produces a great car. Certainly seems to be in demand, but again, the engineering departments of Ford, GM, Chrysler, the major automakers are not to be trifled with either. So.
But given that what goes into an EV is so different than what goes into an internal combustion engine, the Chinese obviously, and many countries around the world, have the opportunity now to leapfrog and just go straight into the EVs. And if they're smart and they're quick.
And China has done a lot of systematic investing, not only for vehicles, but even for their own transformation of their infrastructure, to prepare for that and to lock up that supply chain. It's not, I did a bike trip across China 6 years ago, and every kilometer you go away from Hong Kong, the infrastructure gets a little, less developed, and so that. That drive, that energy that comes from Hong Kong has certainly had that effect on China, and it's going to cascade across. But you understand why China has to invest so heavily in their infrastructure, because they have hundreds of millions of people yet still living a very, very rural, very plain life, and they have to get a roof over their head and a car in their garage, and those kind of things to keep social harmony up north.
America, though. Is America at a disadvantage given the size of the country? One thing that was raised yesterday around the EV discussion was that a lot of Chinese people live in high-rise buildings with a parking garage underneath where they can have grid power, where they can charge their car overnight. Suburban America, are they going to have the ability
some long
to
extension cords to have to reach out to the curb, I guess. You're right. There are some structural differences about America where you could get in a car and have to drive hundreds of kilometers just to the next town. People do that until the charging issues, charging stations, the amount of infrastructure required to lay that down in the United States will be significant. I think the bellwether to watch, more than just Hong Kong in terms of electric vehicle adaptation, is Israel. Because that is literally an island nation, very advanced, very developing economy, but you can't drive your car beyond the Israel borders. And so that is a perfect place for the EV market to have that, the proof is in the pudding.
Well, I know that in Israel there was a company which was looking at doing a battery exchange system whereby you drive your EV up to the petrol station equivalent, and someone would come out and take out your batteries and slide in some new batteries. And obviously, as you say, Israel, you can drive across it in 20 minutes or something. But is the American government seriously now looking at rolling out sufficient infrastructure upgrades?
Certainly not that I've seen. America kind of evolves on its own from market forces, not from that kind of government action. And with as much energy, I mean, look, the other thing, China imports 90% of their petroleum energy. The United States produces most of its requirements now in-house. So there's not that external requirement that drives that electrification like other parts of the world.
But should they be? They because obviously, Donald Trump is famous for talking about China a lot. You can go on the internet and watch a video of him saying China again and again for about 20 minutes. Given that China is making a concerted effort now to overhaul the American, Japanese, European car industries and with their EV programs, isn't it something that the European governments and America should be seriously looking at and putting some investment behind it?
Look, countries, companies, people compete. I think it's a very healthy thing. If the Chinese auto industry was going to try to compete on just internal combustion engines, they would have been an also-ran for a long time. But going after electric vehicles is probably a good strategy for them to give them the opportunity to leapfrog.
Because at the moment, I mean, most of the battery production is out of China. People like CATL.
The Chinese have done a very good job of organizing the infrastructure, the downstream processing, especially in rare earths. They've made a very concerted effort on that, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see them flex their muscles on that in the next 5 to 10 years.
Will your fund have any geographical limitations? Will it? I mean, would it invest, for example, in a battery material processing plant in China, for example?
Again, we're not looking really with this fund to look at processing. We're trying to fill that gap that we see because the big Chinese demand curve doesn't really have the early search, prove, and put into early production phase, and that's the gap we're trying to fill.
Any questions from the audience here? You must have a little lingering question. Clive.
Thanks very much, Eric. Are you looking at the basic processing of the precursor, the chemicals, nickel sulfate, cobalt sulfate, manganese, and so on, or is it only precursors onwards?
Look, we're looking at cobalt, nickel, copper, vanadium, and graphite. We see the biggest demand curve coming there just to fill out the amount of vehicles to be made. I guess I'm not smart enough to understand the specialty chemical industry yet, or the secondary, but I will certainly retain some people to do so.
Clive here knows a lot about nickel.
Okay.
So if you want to know anything about nickel sulfate and things like that, high purity nickel sulfate and how to process that, Clive Whittington.
Fair enough.
James.
Most difficult, well, one of the most difficult metals for everyone to talk about extracting is uranium, because it comes from places which are often politically unstable. It's required for a nuclear industry, and depending on who you listen to, it's either growing rapidly or at least maintaining its position. Will you be looking for uranium as well, given your skills and...
Would we consider it? Yes, but we don't really consider that part of the core of our focus. It's not what the LPs that are coming aboard. It's not the demand that they see the big lift for. But I don't see the big delta coming in uranium prices that I do in the other minerals I've mentioned.
What's the sort of length of investment you're looking to do? Because obviously at the moment people are talking about oversupply. Some, one of the speakers yesterday said, pointed out the fact that there has been a big rush to get into lithium, and as a result, we've seen prices come down this year. What's your sort of thought process behind launching a fund now, and how long will you hold and
raise the fund now, get 3 to 5 projects in the ground going soon over the next 2 years, so that those come to fruition as we see the markets, the really demand curve, just from the amount of plants, the amount of vehicles, the amount of just batteries required, and the other installs going from all the green energy projects. We see that, again, maximizing in the 3 to 5 year period.
Something that came up with your speech at the beginning, how did you end piracy?
So I was a SEAL. Did a few things around the water, and I'd built a defense services business, and it was pretty simple to look at piracy and the way the world was trying to go at it. The United States, the EU, were chasing pirate ships around the Indian Ocean. But if you have a problem in your yard with a wasp nest, you don't chase the wasps around with a spray can. You find the nest and you deal with the nest. Now, piracy is pretty simple to solve, because if you fly along the coast in an airplane and you see a 1,000-foot ship anchored off the coast, you say, aha, that's where the pirates are. Because they grab a ship 2,000 miles out to sea, they drive it back to the Somali coast, and they anchor it a mile off the shore. And they have to sit on it for 6 to 12 months waiting for the ransom to get paid. And while they do that, you have to pay your guards, and you have to feed your guards. So if you build a police force which rolls up on that pirate camp and interdicts that process, it's pretty simple to dry up piracy. And so there was a 600-man unit built called the Puntland Marine Police Force, done in cooperation with the Somali government, both Mogadishu government and the government of Puntland up in the north. And they just rolled up the logs bases of these pirates, and they went active in the summer of 2012. And you see the rate of piracy plummet after that, and it was done. That program cost less than the pirates were taking in ransom per year. So it was kind of it was a fun passion project, and it worked.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was in the news a lot, and then suddenly it wasn't. So,
Funny how that works. The only difference that happened at that time was that police unit. So, but the media once again gets it wrong. What caused the end of it?
well, fantastic. Do we have any final questions? No question in the middle there.
You mentioned vanadium for the EV story. So, but we know that vanadium battery has a very low energy intensity. So how do you see vanadium can be played out in the EV story?
We see the demand coming in just more electric motors.
Or from the charging facilities?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, obviously vanadium flow batteries can't really be moved around. I think is possibly the point. But in terms of charging stations using renewable energy,
Strong
wind
magnets.
turbines, using wind turbines, and when it's not windy, you've got it stored in the vanadium battery. Is that
Correct.
the sort of vibe? 12 children.
Yeah, it's a full house. Well, not anymore. They're mostly off working in college.
Yeah, I have 3, and that's plenty. But well, congratulations on that. But fantastic to hear about your new fund, and it's great that you're backing the EV story. We're big supporters of that, and we look forward to having faster cars that don't pollute as much, faster cars than your pathetic Dodge Challenger. There was one I was reading about the other day which does 258 miles an hour top speed and goes 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. That's just dangerous.
Look, I also had the opportunity as a young naval officer to take a cat shot off an aircraft carrier. That's going to 0 to 140 knots in 1.5 seconds is still the ultimate rush. So
There you go. There you go. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Erik Prince.